Welcome to Screen Quest, a podcast where a fellowship of film lovers and armchair movie experts plays film roulette. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Waterman, joined by Will Rotondi
Hey, how's it going?
and May Finch.
Hello, hello.
Feels a little different this morning to be doing this with a cup of coffee in my hand instead of like a whiskey or a beer. It's very morning talk show host. It's for a little peek behind the scenes. We normally record the show in the afternoon or evening, but I'm kind of digging it. I like the feel.
Good morning, America.
So on today's episode, we are covering our second Was the Book Better Ever and talking about Pride and Prejudice. We, of course, will draw a side card and a new quest at the end of the episode, this episode. But first, we thought we would open with a little background on Jane Austen, the author of Pride and Prejudice, and talk about some of the interesting parallels between her and some of the characters in the book. In particular, I think Elizabeth is often seen as sort of a, loose version of Jane Austen, like fictional parallels there. But yeah, so in the version of the book that I read, there was a nice little introduction that talked about some of these comparisons. The biggest one that stood out to me, and I think one of my favorite aspects, as I'm sure we'll talk about as we discuss the book and the film, is a very, very strong relationship with her sister. Both of them never married. So they had a very close relationship all the way to the end of her life. I thought it was quite sad that they're not really quite sure what disease she died from, but like experts now could probably speculate that it was some form of cancer. But she died in her sister's arms at the age of somewhere in the 40s. I think it was like 42 or something. It's quite young.
Yeah.
I can pull this up and fact check that. But a 41. So yeah, very, very young. But we'll pause there and just discuss that. I mean, obviously in the novel you can see that there's like that strong relationship between the sisters. Did you guys enjoy that aspect? I think it was one of my favorite parts of the book and the movie.
Yes. I feel like I see a lot of Jane Austen in how she writes. About like the kind of like, I guess, marriage culture of the
Yes.
day, especially as an unmarried woman, and how I feel like as an author trying to appeal to a public audience, she still feels obligated to like marry off most of her characters. But I like that she plays with the complicated feelings around that and how it's often a financially motivated thing.
Yeah, so she was engaged twice. And they again, this is the introduction of the version I read, so that like they or from her letters and some of the other things, like, are fairly certain she was like deeply in love at least once in her life, but never married. So I imagine it was quite complicated. I don't know a whole lot about British society at this time, but just from what you can glean from like the novel and just some quick little Wikipedia searches, it seems like it wasn't uncommon to have marriage proposals and deals and stuff fall apart because a lot of it was about like statuses and kind of, advancing your position in society. I thought was quite interesting. You could so there's a lot of debate over whether or not you can consider her like an early feminist novelist because so many of her characters are married off, and it seems like a lot of scholars kind of say like you have to read between the lines. Like she's very much kind of writing within the conventions of the time, and it's more the subtle stuff that kind of would lead you to believe that. Something else that I thought was quite interesting was that like she was forced to pay for the publication of her first novel, Sense and Sensibility, and it was anonymous. And a lot of the critics who loved it were like, "Well, we don't know who wrote this, but we can be quite sure that it's not a woman because it's far too clever," which I thought was just fucking great. And then of course it found such success that she was able to have subsequent novels published free of charge. They're like, oh, it made money, so we're good here. Just that tickled me to no end. I was like, oh boy.
It's especially funny to me as someone who also like writes and is trying to get published, because going to what's called like a vanity press where you pay to get published is seen as like the biggest red flag. Like you don't do that unless you're
Yeah.
Jane Austen.
Yeah. Well, and again, different times, I suppose, but yeah. It did seem like she had good support from her father. That's kind of one of the other things that I wanted to talk about from a biographical standpoint, because I think they do. There's a parallel there with Elizabeth and Mr. Bennet, who is by far my favorite character, as we'll get to. But Jane Austen's father is the one who sort of read an early manuscript of a couple of her works, because she worked on Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice. They had different titles at the time. First Impressions was the initial title of this novel, Pride and Prejudice, and he thought they were both so fine that he kind of insisted that she pursue that career and attempt to get them published, which I thought was really kind of sweet and nice and
Yeah.
surprisingly non-misogynistic. He's not telling her to like go get married. What are you doing with this writing stuff? So it was encouraging to kind of see that, and I think you see that reflected maybe a little bit in this story. May anything that like you can remember from your time long ago studying Jane Austen that you would add to this from a biography? No, not to put you on the hot seat. Those are some of the things that stood out to me. That would kind of lend some nice context, but I am new to Jane Austen, so
Yeah. No, I think you covered about everything I would want to bring up. I am only halfway through my cup of coffee, unfortunately.
first or second cup?
First. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I do think the fact that like she had a few like failed marriage attempts is channeled in her writing a lot, but also just like the wittiness of her characters. And I do think it's interesting that across time periods, novelists will always do the thing of like making their self-insert character very bookish.
Yes. Yeah,
Which I think is
absolutely.
another hint that Elizabeth is very much a self-insert for Jane.
Yep. I would agree with that for sure. They say what right what you know, right? So um taking that advice to heart.
Exactly.
Well, amazing. Let's pivot away temporarily from Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice and have us a side quest, and then we'll circle back here. So this is a Dirty Dancing, which I believe is going to be a new side quest. I don't think we've drawn one of these yet, so hold please while I read the actual like official canon description, and then I will wing it from here on out when we draw one of this. I just like to give it its due since we worked hard. So this description is talk about your favorite dance scene besides Dirty Dancing. So love a little bit of irony on the podcast. So take a moment. I'm gonna abstain because I know I went the last couple times, and I will let one of you guys take this one. So May, you've got one.
Yes, this is the darkest answer I could think of, but um American Psycho.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's just because it's like I don't know, it's the perfect encapsulation of the movie. I think when he first turns on the music, Huey Lewis in the news, and is doing like the little like this number.
The
You're
moonwalk.
listening. Yeah.
I feel so old that I had to tell you it was a moonwalk. Oh no.
No, there's a part where he's standing there and just kind of like doing this. I don't
I
know.
got
But
kind of like shimmying.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Shimmying,
Okay.
thank you.
No
But it's
problem.
like he's moving in the most robotic way possible with just this plastered on smile. And it's so disturbing and uncanny. And like it's not a film I ever would have been like, this needs a dance scene. But it works. It works really well.
I like that pick because it really lightens the tone. It changes like if there had been no music, diegetic or non-diegetic at all, and it was just them talking, and he just screams and hits the guy with the axe. That scene's very different, right? Like, so I love that choice.
How do you feel about that, Will?
I still feel like I did when we talked about it before, that it seemed like he was channeling Jim Carrey with that, just like the over the top grin and just the jerky movement. But yeah, no, I think that's a good choice. I definitely it's a good representation of exactly how outrageous that film is.
unconventional too. Like when I imagined this category, I thought we talk about like, oh, like the sunset, like in the Hollywood Hills dance sequence of La La Land, or like any number of things like in a musical. But well done on
Nah.
subverting expectations there.
Well, my other pick would have been Pulp Fiction, but I was like, that's basic. I want to go a level deeper.
It's iconic, but yeah, no, that's cool. You'd say that for another time, or just skip it all together. But no, that's a great subversion of expectations there. I love it.
Is there another scene in American Psycho that should have had more dancing?
Oh, more dancing. Um, hmm. Maybe the club scene. It seems like none of them are dancing. They're just kind of scowling and sitting and complaining about what they do and trying to out impress each other. I'm like, you're with beautiful women, go dance.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it actually jogged like in a weird tangent. I don't know if anyone's ever heard or seen the show Killing Eve, but there's like one of the most anxiety inducing like murders in that is in a dance club. And you know how like sometimes when you're like really tightly packed in a dance club, there's like you're I mean you're like a sardine, kind of just
Yeah.
you got a very small bubble. Moving around can be hard. There's a scene where a character sees another character zeroing in on them to kill them, and they like are having a hard time getting out of the crowd. And then when the character catches up to them, they're like she's pretending to dance and it's just stabbing him like repeatedly, like at close range. And like no, it was like, oh my god, this is fucking awful. And then like nobody really notices what's happening because he's very subtle about it. But anyway, that's a scene that could have done with less dancing because it made me like lose my shit when I saw it. I was like, oh my god, this is terrifying. Anyway, let's pivot to nice things, the
Yes.
English countryside and society folk and all that good stuff. Because today's episode, we're talking about Pride and Prejudice. So, May, this is your selection. We're gonna let you steer the ship here, or maybe the
Thank you,
carriage. I guess
Chris.
is a better analogy. But yeah,
Oh, I'm taking the horse.
drive the. Oh, okay, sweet, even cooler, even cooler.
Yeah, so talking Pride and Prejudice. It is 2005 film adaptation based on the 1813 book by Jane Austen. It was directed by Joe Wright, and it stars Keira Knightley and Matthew Macfadyen. It centers on the lives of the Bennets, Mr. Bennet, Mrs. Bennet, Miss Bennet, Miss Bennet, Miss Bennet, Miss Bennet, Miss Bennet, and I think Miss Bennet. And their adventures in love and attempting to save the family from financial ruin. This centers on Elizabeth Bennet, the second eldest, and one rather cross and grumpy but very clever Mr. Darcy. I think the best way to do the plot summary here. Basically, there's a lot of back and forth with Elizabeth and various other potential suitors and friends of the family, where she finds out, Darcy has done some rather shady things, and then he proposes to her and she declines, and then she realizes that that was all basically bad gossip, and he actually is a stand-up guy, and he like does a bunch of things to like prove his worth to her, and then proposes again, and she accepts the proposal, and it's a very dramatic scene on the English moor. That's is that a good like quick plot synopsis?
Yeah, I think that covers the main basics for sure.
What were your first impressions of? I'll start with the book. What were your first impressions of the book?
So I took your advice and I did the audiobook, and I was like 50-50, like where I would kind of like go back and forth. Quite easy because there's like chapters marked in both Audible, and then obviously the novel itself has chapter numbers. So I'm glad I did that because I think like the first 25% of it was strictly just audiobook, and it was to get an idea of the kid into the language. I really liked it immediately. I think the opening scene really sold it for me between Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet, because it's a nice little hook to show you sort of like what the family dynamics are like. There was humor in it immediately, and I think anytime something's funny, it's a little easier to like gravitate towards. If this had been very straightforward and serious, I don't know how much I would have gravitated towards it. But um I mean overall I loved the novel. I can see why it's endured. Like not all of it has aged like particularly like well, but I think the crux of what makes this a great novel are a lot of like timeless like themes. And yeah, by the time I got towards like the back like 40%, I just couldn't wait to see like what was gonna go down. Even though I knew like the romances, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure like this is going to work out, because I just can't imagine this would have been as popular like in the time or since, like if it like was like something where it all falls apart at the end. Would have been too like postmodern or whatever. But yeah, I liked it a lot. Glad I read it. Cross it off the pile of shame, right? Like so.
I
What about
really
you,
liked
Will?
the writing style was what did it for me. Like there, I feel like, and this is just from my personal opinion, that if the writing, you can have a great story, but if you can't tell it well, I'm not gonna be able to have the attention span to stick with it. So I think that for me, reading the book, the writing style was what held me to it the most. Unfortunately, the plot was what I didn't like, and mostly not for the fact of what it was, but more because of what it represented for that time period. Like it just sucked. Like that's just how I kind of came away from it was, man, this is unfortunate. But I kind of had a feeling that was sort of the direction it was going to go. It was going to be about people having assumptions about other people and making decisions they regretted later because of those assumptions, and then having to pivot and figure out how to, fix whatever they'd screwed up or had said inappropriately and go from there. So I think between just the reality of what it was like and then some of the over the top characters were what detracted from the story for me from the book. I didn't go the audiobook route, but I did enjoy reading it. Just again for the writing style. And it was nice to see that everything did resolve itself in the end, that the people that you wanted to be okay were okay. I'm of the same opinion that Chris is about the humor, from certain characters, whether we're gonna, from Mr. Bennett or, from other moments in the film where there's nice little side comments about certain characters and their behavior and some of the outrageousness of some of the characters' behavior. Mr. Collins in particular, but I'm sure we'll dive a
Jesus.
little bit more into that. Um,
You didn't
but
love
yeah,
Mr. Collins? He's such a ladies'
the,
man.
the biggest
I mean,
cuck in all of
yeah,
literary history, dude.
yeah,
Like Jesus.
he's apparently very knowledgeable on many things. But
Oh, yeah, well, we'll talk. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, Will.
no, no, please. We'll definitely circle back to that guy. But I think overall with the book, that those were the main things that I took away from it. I'm still glad that I read it, and also mostly because and I will say this too, like I know a lot of people that have said this was one of their favorite novels, and my mom's always told me this was like her favorite book. So I was like, okay, at some point in my life, I should probably check this off the list. So not only in watching a film adaptation of it, but actually reading it. So it was a good choice, and I'm still glad that I did it. Um, and I can understand why it is similar to, again, to what, not to copy too much from Chris, but I can understand why it's endured despite some of the things that I didn't like about it.
Yeah, just to add to that really quickly, and May, I definitely want to hear your takes, because it sounds like you've maybe read this a couple times, but um, like I kind of chose to approach this as like it's kind of a cute time capsule, right? Like, because I was like, if I approach this from like completely modern sensibilities, I probably won't enjoy it. Like, I maybe like even like a little annoyed by stuff. So and having read some books from around the same like period, a lot of stuff you could see coming from a mile away. Like the Mr. Wickham reveal was like a -5 out of a scale of 1 to 10, of like 10 being shocking and like 0 being not surprising at all. But yeah, like I don't know. It feels like this wholesome little time capsule of like, oh, like look at all these people with their, I don't even know what half of them do for actual employment. I know what they earn, but what the fuck does anyone do? But anyway, like, um, yeah. Like the problem seemed so grave in the way that she writes it from their perspectives, and I just thought it was kind of cute. But sorry. May, please tell us what you think of Pride and Prejudice.
I mean, going off what you said about it being cute, like that, I think was the biggest mind like kind of like shift I had to make when I was reading this for the first time. Because like the way that this like 20-something-year-old character is thinking about like dating and romance feels so like early high school, and everything is very dramatic, very life and death. You have to read into every single line the other characters say. You have Mrs. Bennet orchestrating that and just encouraging that in all of her daughters. It's a lot. And once I kind of like reminded myself that like, well, in this time period, it could be kind of life or death, like how you married as a woman, because that determined what your life would be like. It's like, okay, well, I guess it makes more sense why she's
Yeah, 3
well
and
with that
20,
well
you're an old
every
maid, apparently, like somebody
yeah
says in the book, and I was like, Jesus, okay.
uh um so yeah, just like getting into that mindset helps you understand why things are like as high stakes as they are in the book. But I I think that it holds up surprisingly well, even from a modern lens. Like, Will mentioned, a lot of it is about how you can get like wrong impressions of people and you can really put your foot in your mouth, and it takes time and like concrete efforts to kind of undo that. And I like that it's a book that explores that, which I think is a very nuanced topic and very timely in our kind of like modern day of lots of social media gossip and bullying and canceling and stuff like that. Um, while also having like this very funny and over the top romance at the same time. So I like how it balances those two things. I will say, not to jump the gun and get to like the movie before I finish talking about the book, but when I was reading the book, I was never fully in for like Mr. Darcy. Like the whole time I was like, really, Liz? Like you could do better.
He's absent from a lot of the book, in a way that they like, I think, rightly correct, like in the film.
Mm-hmm.
He's present a little bit more, but yeah.
I agree. But to pivot to the film, the film was like the first time I was like, okay, I see the appeal of Mr. Darcy. Like when there's actually like a warm body occupying this role, it's like you can kind of get it. What were
Especially
your
Matthew McFadden doesn't
right?
hurt the prospect. He's got the best puppy dog eyes, like I think of any fucking
Oh,
actor like ever.
So yeah, what did you guys think of the movie?
I liked it a lot more. I think that well, I liked it for a couple of reasons, main reasons. I liked that it condensed what I felt needed to be condensed from the book. They didn't have it too over the top for certain items, that you can get the gist of what the character was without needing like the extensive sort of examples of how outrageous they were or what the conflict was. So whereas you might have like a chapter or two for Mr. Collins, he's like shortened down to a few, lines of dialogue, and then we'll cut to something else, or we'll move around the room to see other characters and how they're interacting. Or Catherine de Bourgh and her pompous attitude about knowing everything and telling everybody what they need to do, and how she doesn't want Elizabeth to marry Mr. Darcy. That's also very much condensed well enough that it gets the point across, and it's paced well enough, and acted as well, exceptionally by Judi Dench, that you get the point, and you don't need to worry about harping on all the extra, I guess, what felt like extraneous dialogue. Um, and I liked how it condensed a lot of sort of the back and forth between the letters of the characters to each other, and sort of kept moving the plot along a little bit more. And then took some of the language that may have seemed a bit over the top if you're reading it or trying to read it quickly, and made it more accessible to a more modern audience. I mean, still kept a lot of the style, and even in some places like verbatim the writing from the actual quotes or dialogue from the book reused for the characters in the film, but I felt for the most part it was updated enough that you still got the feel of it, and it was still true enough to the book without being too complicated. Um, but I agree with Chris. I felt like actually with Mr. Darcy having somebody there, and also for him to have more dialogue. Like I feel like in the books, Elizabeth talks about sort of what their exchanges were, but you don't really get the details of what the conversation was. So you just rely on what her sort of recap, or I should say, Jane Austen's recap for that character was, without knowing exactly what was exchanged in that dialogue. So I think that was very helpful. And then just having somebody that could give that nuanced sort of performance where I believed, okay, Mr. Darcy doesn't think that Elizabeth's sister Jane really likes his best friend, Mr. Bingley, or okay, Mr. Darcy really is sort of like, you could see the little side glances, or you could see the subtle, facial expression to make me think, okay, so he is interested in Elizabeth. So that to me, I felt visually helped a lot to make it more believable for not only the conflict that goes on in the book, but just sort of fleshing out the characters a bit more for me and making it believable.
I think it's one of the most effective adaptations I've ever seen from like page to screen. Like efficient is a word that came to mind, but also graceful. Like I think the way that they cram some of that dialogue and, like Will said, condense some of the things where like you still get the things that are said and the important plot developments and marry them in scenes, like thinking about Mr. Collins and the ball and that dance scene where there's the back and forth and the simultaneous conversations. That was stunning to like, just, I mean, from a technical standpoint, but also from a narrative standpoint, how like you're getting two very different things across, and you're laughing your ass off at like the absurdity of Elizabeth having to pivot and manage those two conversations. I think that's just a really great example of how they are doing that, condensing down of a lot of stuff in the novel into something that keeps the plot moving. I think it's smart to have, like, for example, to have Jane go off to London on her own, like, like instead of like Elizabeth now having to accompany her, like she's like off on her own, and Elizabeth's kind of doing her thing. But I think you hit the nail on the head, May, when you said warm bodies to occupy this. I feel like this felt so much more alive than the novel, and it's not like a fault of like Austen's writing. It's just like one of those things that seeing human beings like perform this, you get like a lot more accessible emotion. And like I was actually quite surprised by how much the movie made me like feel like some of the stuff, like the romance and things, more than I did in the novel, because sometimes it feels a little dry on the page. Whereas like here, like some of those scenes I feel like just like really like leapt out, and felt like they were alive in a way that I didn't always get in the novel. But yeah, I mean, I could not imagine a more effective adaptation with the running time that it has, especially. Like, I'm sure if you wanted to do a mini series or something, but I don't know that I would want that. Like, if there was like a 2 hour 45-minute director's cut like of this, I don't feel like I would need it or really want it necessarily. Like, maybe out of curiosity I'd watch it once, but like, yeah.
So fun fact, there actually is a mini series that came out before the movie.
Of course.
Which is which I have not seen, but I've heard is much more faithful to the original book, but I don't think is as good probably. I don't
This
know.
seems
I'll
to be
have
the one that
to.
everyone loves. Like when I talk to anybody who like is like a fan of it, like this is the version that seems to be, maybe not universally, but like largely regarded as like the best. Sorry.
I think it's only if you're like a real devotee of Austen that you might prefer the miniseries, just because it's more faithful. But I agree with everything you two said. I think this is a really good adaptation of the novel. And one thing I want to point out for that is a lot of Jane Austen's writing. Like you get this a lot in Mansfield Park or Manfield Park. I forget which one it is, but the novel that came out next to this one. It's very gossipy. You get all this interiority of these different characters, and like that's so much like layering on top of the actual dialogue and what's actually like going on plot wise. And I feel like this movie actually captured that in a lot of in a lot of scenes. Like
Mhm.
there's so much going on, like you said, with all the subtle glances back and forth between characters, and you get to see people's like facial expressions as other characters are talking. And especially like rewatching the movie for me, it was like, oh, I'm following and I can actually like I understand why these characters are making these faces at these moments. Based on what like I know about this character now. And I thought that was really masterful, honestly. And gave the movie a lot of that life that the book might have been missing.
It was great exercise watching this right after like reading the book too, because I felt like everything was so fresh. You know, you
Mhm.
had these like preconceived notions of like what things might look like on the screen. So seeing it actually play out was really cool. Like even like the opening of like, oh, like I wonder how they're gonna like tackle like that initial conversation. And I love like the eavesdropping and sort of how the camera is like sweeping in one door and out the other and like coming like kind of giving you a tour of like the Bennett household, and you're getting little snippets. um Spectacular opening. I mean, really, really again efficient. Like you get a little bit of each character's personality, and then of course like the big reveal of like the Bingleys moving and all that stuff. A plus.
Speaking of the Bennett's introduction, I thought the best way to do this movie would just to go kind of like character group. Go by that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what do you guys think of the Bennett family? And do you have a favorite Miss Bennett?
Love the Bennett family. Like I said, Mr. Bennett, if we're, you know, talking about non Miss Bennett's, is by far my favorite. Not only because of his like dry wit and like, you know, the urge to retreat to his library, which I totally feel like, yo, let me go into my office and read a book. Like, I don't care about society for like an hour. I just want to like bury my face in a book. Totally appealed to me.
He's very
Plus also
girl dad.
yeah, yeah. Well, like the supportiveness, like again, like you've seen that kind of translate probably some biographical influence there. Loved it, and just taking the ever loving piss out of Mrs. Bennett constantly and trying to like stoke the anxiety for his own amusement was great.
Yeah.
But as far as Miss Bennett's go, I'll tell you who I don't like. That's Lydia.
Yeah.
Bennett. Well, if we could cover like more of that plot point, we'll go there.
Yeah.
Um,
Good, go for it.
Yep.
it well, we're supposed to be covering what we like, right? So I'll say. I mean, I feel like it's just, you know, she's sort of self-entitled, and I one thing that I felt like was missing from the movie that the book covers is like kind of her comeuppance, you know, like where they like do it's not really titled as an epilogue, but it's basically an epilogue where it tells you where characters kind of are landing, you know, post romantic resolution. But anyway, it's got to be Elizabeth, right? Like she's witty, like she's the kind of the core. Her loyalty to Jane is really like admirable. You know, to the point of like she like rejects a marriage proposal, and I think you know you could argue it's like the oh what you did to Mr. Wickham, but I think it's really like her perceptions of like her sister's happiness being ruined that were like is probably the core of like why she's going like I don't want to marry you, like you're responsible for ruining the happiness of somebody I love dearly. um so yeah, there's just and there's like a I don't know, like a lot of qualities about her. I think like her independence, just walking to the Wickhams, or not the Wickhams, the Bingley's house, you know, um, and it's kind of derided by Mr. Bingley's sister, but like I don't know, like she doesn't give a fuck. She's like, I like being out of doors. I'm gonna walk there. I don't need a carriage. I don't need a horse. Like it's awesome.
And you can see like in that moment when Caroline's like basically roasting her and is like, "Did you see her hem?" Mr. Darcy is just like obviously impressed.
I'm trying to think back to the book versus the film, because if it's the film, I like Jane's character. Just because I like who they chose to be. Like, I think the casting was great, and I just like how her character is eh, well established in the sense of um I'm trying to think about how I want to phrase it. I feel like she was very true to the novel in sort of how reserved she was about not necessarily giving across how she felt about everything, but also being optimistic. And granted, optimistic to a fault at some points, maybe more so in the book and how she felt like things were, or tried to look at the, you know, the brighter side of the situation. But I think overall, I still, if we're not going to choose like the obvious, characters or the main characters, if I have to choose somebody else, I would choose Jane to be one of the favorite ones. Um, because she's there for Elizabeth, she's always sort of been like, she's been supportive, and if when things change in terms of like relationships, or when new information comes to their attention about Mr. Darcy or Mr. Wickham, or how things are going to go, she's always the one who's like, okay, well, I believe you, and I will support you, and also I hope you are as happy as I am. So we all really kind of want somebody like that in our lives, right? Even when they're wrong about stuff, we still like, the people that see the good in the situation. So I think for me, that would be Jane. Uh,
Especially for her as like the eldest sister too.
yeah,
It's like leading with positivity.
exactly. And
She's
especially
naive as
after
fuck
she's,
though, man. Like
I mean,
sometimes,
yeah,
like,
yeah. Like I said,
like
to a fault sometimes, but
she could
still,
come across somebody stabbing another human being to death and be like, "Oh my god, he fell into your," like Chicago's all, "He fell into your knife like 20 times. That's
yeah,
terrible." Like, oh
yeah.
no.
Like, what did he do to deserve this?
Yeah.
He must have done something very, very horrible to deserve getting stabbed multiple times by you. Um, but yeah, it's true, and that's why I say that I temper that with the optimistic to a point, but still, I mean, I would rather have that optimism than have to deal with like Lydia's little, like, dude, when she got hitched, and then it was like, I'm just gonna rub it in everybody's face. You're never gonna be as happy as me, and I'm gonna be living this, this high lifestyle, and you should come hang out with me because I'll help hook you up with some dudes here in the north of England where we're going to be stationed. I'm like, no. But clearly that was the intent, right? Like, we were all supposed to be frustrated with how she uh behaved and almost ruined the family's reputation, or arguably did, depending on which character you ask in the novel.
Yeah.
And yeah, so just very much thinking of herself, self-centered, and then also just like very pompous at the end. I think to some extent they show that in the film, that it's not all going to be okay, because doesn't Mr. Wickham kind of like yank her down in the carriage when she's waving to everybody for like an extended scene while they're heading off, and then it's like she gets pulled down by him kind of abruptly. I feel like that sort of conveyed like he's not really thrilled with this, and it's not going to be okay. But I agree that in the book they do go a little bit more into detail about how it wasn't entirely happily ever after. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. So there is that. But yeah, I'd say that covers what I was thinking in terms of that. I mean, Mr. Bennett, we will definitely come back to, but of the Bennett women, that would be my option.
Hey, I asked about the Bennett family in its entirety as well. So if you want to talk about Mr. Bennett, go for it.
Guy just likes to hang out, and I mean, yeah, he just wants his alone time. He has his separate time for just himself, and I understand that. I would like to actually ask the question. Chris brought this up earlier, and I've wondered it when I was reading the book and especially watching the film. Like, I understand if they're well enough to employ a bunch of people to do all this daily labor on their estate, but what was the what was either the retirement situation or the family inheritance situation or like the allotment? It was like everybody got like an allotment of money every year, but I don't know where that came from or why it was like
Yeah, I'm
only that
baffled
much
by
every
that.
year. Like,
Do they just have sweatshops in London, like with like little like street urchins that they're killing? Like, I mean, like, because that changes
yeah,
my perceptions of like how they're fucking doing business. Like, they never talk about anybody actually working, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Where's this money coming from?
yeah. All right, like I understand if they have an inheritance, like if they had wealthy family members before and they inherited that wealth, but like why is it doled out like X amount of money every year? Why isn't just like I'm rich and I have access to all of it, so why can't I use it? So I'm curious. I'm sure there's a reason, but I'm just curious what that financial sort of setup was back then. So
Yeah, I think it's like you have the family riches accumulated and you basically set up each family member on their own kind of salary or whatever. Um, Also, there's two important differences here between the book and the movie with regards to the Bennett's like class. One is that the movie makes the whole setting actually quite a bit earlier. It's in like the late 1700s, I think, instead of the early 1800s like it is in the book. And they're also definitely like they're portrayed as lower class in the movie than they are in the book. But yeah, I don't know where the Bennett family fortune originally came from.
Or even like the Bingley family, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if there's that much money coming in, or maybe they have investments in London or something, and like it's just like they own businesses and somebody else runs them, and like the income comes in. I don't know. It just that it was one point I was not clear on, because I'm like, everyone just seems to be going to balls and like chilling.
Yep.
And yet,
Going
I
on long
mean,
walks. Yeah.
yeah, where's the financial like program that I can invest in to figure out how to do that, please? Like, listen, I'll throw you guys some balls. Like, we'll hang out. I'll lend you the secret once I figure it out. But yeah.
Yeah, I will do some research because now I'm curious where the Bennett fortune came from. But
It seems like something probably would have been understood by like the audiences at the time, just no idea.
yeah, and I think the financial precarity was just that inheritance would not pass on to the girls. So basically, marriage was their only option.
That I understood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Collins coming and being like, oh, you could keep the household in the family if you just will but marry the wettest blanket of wet blankets that ever existed.
I love speaking of Mr. Bennett and how great he is. I love his line when he's like, well, either way, right now you're going to lose a parent. You'll lose your mother if you marry him, and or you lose your mother if you don't marry him, and you lose me if you do. I was like, yeah, Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, he's like, fuck this guy.
Yeah, that was
basically.
that was a great moment. Yeah, I don't know, like Lydia is annoying, and I will say she's also very young.
Young,
She's
yes.
15
15?
in the movie. Is she the same age as the book? I can't remember, but
I think so, yeah. Because there's like that line that's like she's not yet 16, or something like that.
In defense of Lydia, she's very young and she's seen the anguish her older sisters have gone through. And I think that she, in a backwards way, probably thinks she's removing like herself as a burden from her family by doing this. Even though her family ends up paying a lot of money to force the marriage through. Like I think there can be some good intent behind her decision, and if anything, I think like what happens with that relationship and how it kind of isn't great, is not ideal. Is if anything just kind of Jane Austen like warning young girls that like, yeah, as much pressure as you feel, like don't do this, don't be a Lydia. Because that's my read on that character. As for my favorite Miss Bennett, I'm gonna have to say Elizabeth as well, especially movie Elizabeth. I feel like book Elizabeth also got a little annoying at times.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Although I have to give a shout out to poor Mary, just because she has a hard time the whole way through. She's trying her best on that piano.
I practiced
Yeah.
all day.
She's a little more omnipresent in the film, but like there was one point in the book I'm like, oh fuck, there's another one, isn't there?
I'm just thinking of the Arrested Development thing where it's like her.
Yeah.
So poor Mary. Don't forget Mary. So going I guess one degree of removal from the Bennets. Before we get to our suitors, let's talk, or our good suitors. Let's talk about Mr. Collins.
Man.
I'm glad that Elizabeth dodges that unbelievably vast and probably bottomless pit of despair in terms of like what that life would have looked like for her. They kind of hint at it a little bit with her friend Miss Lucas, a little bit, and how things end up, but that's also seemed like a cautionary kind of thing of like there's a trade-off, right? Like in marriage sometimes if you're going to do it for the purposes of strengthening your position, whether it be financial or societal or whatever. Um, hated that guy though, couldn't stand him. He was a kiss ass. He I don't know. There's nothing likable at all about that character. So I enjoyed seeing them really go to town on making sure that you knew he was a pitiful little shithead in the movie. Like anyway, yeah.
Yeah, with again, looking at this through a modern lens, he just reads very like incel like to me.
Yeah. Oh, I understand you're obligated to say no like the first time, and you might
Yeah.
even say no again, but like
Yeah.
you don't want to say no. Like that shit. It's so much more cringe in the fucking movie, but I like her response. Just seems a little stronger to it, but yeah.
There's that. There's like it just him thinking he's the shit, and that like obviously people want to listen to him do a 2-hour sermon after dinner, and that he's got such a way with women, despite never ever listening to one besides maybe Lady Catherine.
He does get to make a funny intercourse joke though in the sermon. That's about the only good thing that ever comes out of that character.
How'd you
I
feel
thought,
about Mr. Collins, Will?
I mean, pretty much the same thoughts as you have both mentioned before. Like, just generally don't. Well, and it's intentional. We're not supposed to like him. I think that it's excellently portrayed in the book that he is a pain in the ass, and that he thinks he knows everything, or he will want to try and tell you about everything. But I found it interesting because in the book, I felt like he seemed a lot more self-assured, at least the way that I read it. In the movie, he seems a lot more timid, and not necessarily a bad choice to go either route, because I think the basic, like the essence of the character is still kept, which is that he thinks he's got power, or that he is in a good position. I should say not necessarily power, but he is in a good position for himself, and to have the ability to be someone that would want to be, so like would be a good husband to whoever would be interested in that, or in that marriage, in that situation, and his inheritance. But I think that overall, yeah, he's just, nobody wants to listen to that guy. In the book, they have to listen to him more than we had to in the film, which is the one upside. But yeah, that one scene in particular, I think I'm glad that, even though, I guess kind of back to my point about how it was a really shitty situation for women in that time period, I'm glad that at least Elizabeth has the ability to tell him no, and that no is accepted eventually. It's not accepted immediately, clearly, and that is the frustration of that scene in particular, which stands out to me more than most. Where it's like he just thinks that, oh, I'll just, I'll persuade you, or you're just trying to like build up the excitement and the tension until you finally say yes to me. But I am grateful that at least she had the ability to tell him no, and that the no is honored at some point. But
No small feat though. Her mom is like,
oh yeah, no, she
Mr.
wants to
Bennett, make
convince
her
her.
say yes, and like
Yeah,
you basically is like, chasing her. Like she's obviously upset, like to
yeah,
try to convince her to.
no.
Yeah,
But
the thing that
but
really
still,
did me in, like in the book, was when they're having the family crisis and he sends that fucking letter that's like, you need to, like, he's telling the family, like, not offering to help in any way, just telling them what they need to do to avoid further shame. It's like, send them a box of bees back, or like throw some cow shit in a fucking package and send it to him. Like, I was just like, man, you fucking asshole. Like,
yeah.
thanks for the help there, Mr. Collins. Appreciate you using all that power and influence you're always going on about to actually help the situation.
But I wish they'd kept like the little letter that Mr. Bennett sends back to him, in the book. Just that really short little like smart ass response. I wish that had been in the film. That would have been great. But
Yeah.
yeah. Oh well. Anyway, And to our listeners, the smart ass response, you're just going to have to read the book. I'm not going to give everything away on this podcast. So you got to read all like 400 and some pages. Come on. Or 300 and some change, depending on which
From
version.
Beyond the Grave, Jane Austen appreciates that. Get another sub in, even
Yep,
from
that's
Beyond the
right.
Grave. Those
That's right.
metrics matter.
I can't tell everything. Can't tell everything. You got to read it. Or the audiobook. Just listen to the audiobook. Do what these guys did. Come on.
Yeah, we honor spoilers even 200 years after the fact.
That's right.
When it's been out for 300 years, maybe, but
Hey, it's a new
only
generation every so often that gets exposed to it, so we can't give it all away.
well, to uh to shake Mr. Collins from our minds, let's talk about Bingley and his sister. What were your thoughts on the Bingleys?
Well, I like Mr. Bingley. I think that at least, and especially in the movie version where you get to see him act it out. I mean, he is sort of shown to be somebody who's not not very confident in his decisions, and doesn't he's very ruled by his, I guess, his emotion in terms of the fact, like when he's excited to see Jane, he makes it very obvious, at least in our eyes, and in the book, everybody's eyes too. But his I don't I have no complaints about him. He just seemed to be having a good time. His sister, on the other hand, is the one who likes to try and like manipulate people. I think more so in the film with how she's portrayed as like being very manipulative, but like in the book is seems to be a little bit more subdued in terms of like that's conveyed more in how she writes to like the letters that she sends versus like her behavior as it's shown in the film when they're at these events. I could have remember that incorrectly, but that was just the
You're
impression
right.
that I got. Yeah.
Make it much more clear much earlier that
Mhm.
she looks down upon the Bennets and kind of like sneers at the idea that any Bennett would be joined to like anybody in their little circle, whether it be Mr. Darcy or Mr. Bingley. Yeah. With you, he's amiable. Like they did a good job in the film making him seem kind of like a little bit of a himbo, like in a good way. Like he just very earnest and he it's good that he has a Mr. Darcy at his side, even if he gets bad advice on occasion. Probably you'd imagine that that's probably some of the appeal of that friendship is that Mr. Darcy fills some gaps, maybe in terms of like where his blind sides might be. And yeah, I mean I agree on Catherine Bingley is revealed like, a little bit later in the book to be kind of duplicitous, but um didn't like her from like the first instant in the movie. But again, that's just them doing a good job, like kind of setting that character up for the manipulations later on. I tried to like come at it and be like, can I be a little sympathetic? Like she's in the same sort of position, right, as like all the women in this, of like she's trying to like angle for a marriage, right, and kind of cement her position. But nah, I couldn't get there. I was like, I still think it's shitty to like, yeah, you guys are all on the same spot. Why can't it be like may the best like bachelorette like win kind of thing and just like rely on your own qualities, right, to maybe do that instead of trying to like sabotage people. It felt a little fucking dirty, but so didn't care for her.
Yeah, I think she is characterized fairly harshly in the movie. Because like, yeah, you want her to have solidarity with the other women, but it's also like she has the advantage of her upbringing in class in this kind of rat race, and she loses that if the men in her class start like, you know, seriously considering women that are beneath her in class, basically. So she's has an advantage and she's basically clawing to keep it. And it's competitive and shitty, but I can understand why she would be like, well, I'll be in an even worse situation if this becomes the norm. So I want to prevent that kind of thing. So it's an understandable motivation, I think, for her. But I also feel like this was the era where it was like very common to have like a kind of a catty female antagonist in your movie. So she fits that bill well. As far as Mr. Bingley goes, I love him. I think he's adorable. the scene, it's so brief, but at the second dance that they're at, when he like throws a big ball and he's kind of like following Jane around like a puppy, and he just like kind of grasps at the back of her dress like so longingly. It's just like, oh, yeah, I think he's adorable, and I think he's also an interesting foil to Elizabeth because he is much less intelligent, but they do both kind of fall for the same like bad gossip
Mhm.
throughout most of the movie. And ironically, in both cases, it's Darcy being like, nope, this is how things actually are, and clearing things up, that ends up persuading both of them to go after love. All right. Do you guys, I want to like keep time in mind. Do you guys want to just go and talk about Darcy now, or do you want to also talk about Mr. Wickham?
Let's talk about both.
Darcy and Wickham are. I think like Wickham will be pretty
Yeah, we
pretty
can
brief.
integrate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my only thing is fuck Wickham. There we go.
Done.
Yeah. Not a single redeemable thing about that
Yeah.
character whatsoever. And I think it's like a lesser extent kind of showing you like again some of those potential pitfalls. Like really like this seems like it could read as a manual of like here's what could happen to you if you pick the wrong dude, you know. Yeah, I don't know. Like I missed the satisfaction a little bit of seeing Elizabeth fucking like pick at him a little bit, like in some when she knows the truth about him and
Yeah.
him panicking. I think you could maybe read between the lines a little bit and infer that part of what happens with Lydia is maybe him retaliating a little bit, you know, because she does have that dinner where she makes it very plain that she knows what happens to like or happened to Mr. Darcy's sister. And I think sort of like that doesn't seem to be an accident to me that like, you know, that's what follows. But I don't know. Did you guys think that's just coincidence, or is it he's getting a little bit of revenge?
I think he's just an opportunist
Yeah.
and had already met the Bennets. So it's like,
Mhm.
well, there's a younger one.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
I
gross.
agree. Yeah, I don't think he had much. He doesn't seem like he has much in the way of planning anything, since he's just in debt to everybody. So yeah, I think it was just the option was there. He thought, why not? I'll give it a shot, and he chose poorly again. So
All right, on to Darcy. What do we think of Mr. Darcy?
hotter in the movie. No.
I
It's true.
correct.
It's true.
You know what? I'm gonna give a shout out to Colin Firth. I'm sure he was good too in that miniseries. I'll have to watch it. It's on Hulu. To anybody who's listening to us and wants to know where to go, at least right now, probably Amazon or BBC. One of those options, just or all of them. And so yeah, go check it out. But yeah, Mr. Darcy's. I like the version better in the film. Again, more dialogue. I got to understand the character better. I felt like in the book he's still interesting, but I don't think that is as interesting as we get to see in the film. And I understand more watching the film why like it felt more believable to me not only as his character in the film for why he does what he does, but I believed the romance more between his character and Elizabeth more in the film based on the subtlety and the expression and just the decisions that they made. Like how they fleshed out those characters with the overall plot made more sense to me seeing it acted out. In the book, it seemed a little kind of flip-floppish and confusing as to why suddenly it just felt like all of a sudden Mr. Darcy's interested in Elizabeth after he'd been making all these comments that didn't really seem like he was, and she seemed to kind of flip-flop as to how she felt about him. And I get that, you can be confused about your feelings, especially, like we were all that age and various circumstances about how we felt about the opposite sex, at some point, and I get that, and I can remember what it was like in high school, for comparison. But I don't know, it just seems so in the book it seemed less coherent to me than watching it in the film. And circling back to the question of Darcy himself, that was mostly where I felt like that came from. So
Yeah, it is as you said earlier, like seeing the glances and the facial expressions and watching that interest kind of grow. And I think they do a better job of conveying him as shy, in the the film that's why he's maybe perceived as being a bit standoffish. Like I don't know that shyness would have been an excuse in the time to not engage with people socially, but obviously people probably still would have been shy, right? You just consider it rude if you don't easily make conversation out of thin air. So I thought they did a really good job with that. Yeah, and the novel, I kept going like, when is there going to be like some sort of like hint at like the romance that I know is supposed to be part of this story? And when he like walks in and like slams the door and is like, well, I can't deny it anymore. Like, I love you. And I was just like, what? Like,
Yeah, like,
huh?
where did that come from? Yeah, so
Like,
forced.
I like the only reason that I've even anticipated this is just because I'm so familiar from like a pop culture standpoint. But I'm like, what? And maybe that was supposed to be kind of the point, is that like it comes out of thin air in the book, and could have been the sensibility of the times where they're like, oh, like he's been pining silently, for Elizabeth all this time, but it just didn't hit the same for me. Um, I also felt like it would like the ending sort of like resolution where like they come together and they, the proposal so much more amazing in the film, and I actually felt the romance where like it felt like they were checking off like like the list of like, here's all the stuff to like explain, like when did you first like start to have feel, like it just was very stiff for me. Again, just maybe it didn't age well. Whereas like that scene on the moors that you alluded to, where like the sun comes between the two of them and all of that, it's just beautifully shot, and you can feel it. Even the scene in the rain where he like kind of so much more powerful in the movie, I think, than the book, because he's not just sort of like plainly like stating it. You can feel. I mean, again, it's McFadyen has those like puppy dog eyes like no other. So like you could feel that pain a little bit, and sort of like the desire to want to like, have said this a long time ago. So love the character. Again, I can see why he's like, loved from the novel, but I think this is a great example of somebody that they really did a great job getting across more efficiently like who they are, and making it feel a little less of a surprise in terms of like the revelation of the romance and all of that. Also, he's a nice guy, like deep down. That was really helpful. Like the grand gestures and shit. I was like, like if some dude or like did this for me, and like I'm in Elizabeth's, like how's your heart not gonna melt, right? Like your family's in potential like ruin, and he fixes the marriage prospects for Jane and patches that up and does all that stuff. Like clearly a nice guy, like deep down. Thumbs up. Opposite of Wickham.
Truly, truly. Everyone else is in debt to him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so like I said, I was not sold on the book Darcy. I was like, this guy's just a dick. What does Elizabeth see in him? And then in the movie, I'm like, okay, he's a dick, but he has other things going for him. And you find out, like, for me, the biggest thing that kind of like changed my mind on him was like the very late reveal that, oh, he's been like engaged to this random girl from birth, apparently, and like has all of these crazy expectations on his head that kind of mirror Elizabeth's in an interesting way. And I think explain some of his erratic behavior and some of his pressure to feel like if he's going to get out of that arranged marriage, he has to find someone that's of higher status, and to kind of rationalize that, I guess. So it also makes it more powerful that he's just like, nah, fuck that. I like Elizabeth, and chooses her anyway, despite Dame Judi Dench's disapproval.
God, I love Judi Dench. I was
She's
just gonna
great
say
in it.
that.
Quick
She was
side note.
perfect. She was
I
perfect.
absolutely like when I'm reading the book, right? I'm like, if Judi Dench or Maggie Smith does not play, because everyone knows when you need like a strong, forceful, slightly scary, like older woman, like it's the
Yes.
Dame Judi Dench or the Dame Maggie Smith. And I was glad I wasn't disappointed, because I was like, one of these better be Catherine de Bourgh.
And as
Exactly.
soon as I saw the cast list for that film, I'm like, I know who she's gonna be, and I am all for it, and I am waiting. I am so happy. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And just imagine like her getting a call like, yep, Hi, Dame Judy Dench. So as you know, we're in the process of spinning up production on Pride. Yeah, I'll play Catherine de Bourgh. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, yeah.
I'm
She
already
knows.
there.
She
Yep.
has to know.
I know why you're calling, and yes.
Oh my
Uh,
God. Um, so yeah, mixed feelings on Darcy. I like how layered he is. I think it's also kind of a rare romance to like have the man be the pining one. So that was kind of cool. Um, but yeah, no, I like movie Darcy. Also the scene where he has just helped Elizabeth up into the carriage and he like clenches his hand and then unclenches it is the most iconic scene in all of movie history, and you cannot change my mind.
Oh yeah. What do you like that it's just like a subtle sort of like
It's just something
because
about that scene, man.
yeah, okay. Just curious. I mean, it is interesting that they like go in on his hand and not his like face. It's kind of an interesting way of like conveying where his head's at and stuff.
It's so masterfully subtle and says so much. It's like I never would have thought you could like communicate this much emotion just with like a single shot of a hand, but you can. It was great.
I mean, if Tarantino can do it with feet, why not? You know?
gonna say
No.
some people like hands. Yeah, no judge, no judge. It's cool.
I mean, after all, like hands are just like top feet, right? Like,
It's true. Hey, look,
I
even
don't know.
Zoolander had a thing about hand models. So I mean, it's important. Just it's fine. They're in catalogs. They're
Oh my
necessary.
God.
We could, yeah. No,
You guys are gonna
that was,
label me as a hand person.
yeah.
So in this latest film that we watched, and the nice shot of the close up of the hand of this one character, yeah, we'll bring it back.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, look
Okay,
what you've
to
done.
move
Look what you've done.
to change subjects.
Yep.
What were your favorite scenes?
What was my favorite hand pick?
No.
No. I'm sorry. Favorite scenes of the film overall, or from the book or the film?
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to steal from Chris on this one again. Probably not steal too much, but in the movie, I think that the important scenes between Darcy and Elizabeth, so whether it's in the rain or it's at the very end with the sun coming up, I think that was, yeah. I mean, that's kind of an easy answer for me, but also, not to rehash too much on it.
So in scenes that like weren't covered in the film, like I can tell you the one that like really got to me, and it's a credit to Donald Sutherland's acting, was like the kind of discussion of, do you want to go through with this marriage? Like won't have any objections if you've changed your mind, and just like him sort of like happy crying. Ah,
Yeah.
was good stuff. Like really, really, really good stuff. Like that got to me big time. Um, as far as the book, one of the strongest emotions I felt was like just, I mean, I feel like rational, justified anger at like the Catherine de Bourgh confronting Elizabeth and trying to make her to promise. Like, I was like, where the fuck does this bitch get off to like telling her like what she can or can't do? I was so mad, like reading
Nice.
that. Like, I mean, like I could feel like the physical reaction of my body. I was so mad. I think just because like I had enough of her at that point with all of her, like, oh, I would have been a great player, like if I, had learned to play music myself. Yeah, okay, of course you would have. Or like, oh, if not for my daughter's out, like everyone, adjacent to her, it can be excused from whatever, but it like anybody outside, like, we're held to such high standards. So I was over it. But so there's my picks right there. Easy.
Nice.
Amazing.
I'd say book wise for me, and this is just going to be, I don't know what this says about me. I mean, I will say that the length of the book, this is not to try and criticize it too badly, but for for me, going through and listening to all of the sort of back and forth and the drama that was happening, I think the point where Lydia disappeared with Mr. Wickham, I was like, oh, it's getting good now. So we're getting some serious, shit might be going down. And I know sounds really bad, but I was like, well, this is exciting, like it's not just like trying to find a husband now, or deal with marriage proposals. It's like, oh, something really good or bad or something weird is about to happen, and I'm kind of like excited to see how this is going to turn out. Um, So for me, that sort of like I felt like the plot picked up right around that point, which is kind of in like the last tail end of the novel anyway. Which that's probably speaks more to my patience with reading a book than it than it does anything else. But I enjoyed reading that just for like there was a little bit more tension. I felt like there was more of a like, oh, is she gonna be okay? Did she really get kidnapped? Or did she like elope with this guy, and not really
Yeah, I was
knowing
like, is
how
this
that
a
was gonna
ransom
turn?
situation? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. And so
It kind of
that
turns into that with the dowry, like
Yeah,
yeah.
that's how I sort of interpreted it. But
So that would probably
is
be
the
my pick for
implication
the
there that
book.
they were like having premarital sex and like the marriage was the only way out of? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
or that
assuming, yeah,
even if
had
they
to be.
weren't, that would be public assumption.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would
perception.
be the impression. Yeah, if you just headed off together, the two of you alone in London. Yeah, definitely. How about you, May? What were your favorite moments?
It's probably a tie between yours, Will, to steal from you. I'm sorry.
That's
Because
okay.
I agree. It turns into kind of like almost like a bit of an action like thriller kind of
Yeah,
thing right
taken.
there.
Yep.
So yeah, for the book, it's a tie between that and honestly just that opening because it is so strong and so good at establishing the characters. Also, I pulled it up just so I could read it verbatim, but I absolutely love the first sentence of this book. It's iconic because it does a great job of just communicating the whole book in a single sentence. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Killer way to
Nice.
start off a novel like this.
Definitely. I like that you characterized the last bit as kind of an action thriller because now I just picture like Darcy, like, getting some pistols and a saber. I mean, he's like talking to his buddy, Mr. Bingley, and he's like, I'm not a gentleman, not tonight. to bring it back to Lethal Weapon.
Oh man, yo, if they could redo that trailer for the film like they did for Jaws, man, I'd be down. Make Pride and Prejudice, yeah, action thriller.
I
Yeah,
mean, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is a movie.
that's
Oh,
true,
is
but
it a
that's
film too?
zombies. That's
I know
yeah,
there's a book, but that's cool.
yeah, yeah.
I'm kind of curious to read that now that I'm familiar with the story. Like, because I'm like, this will be lost on me, right? When it came out, I'm like, this sounds interesting, but now having read the novel, I feel like I would appreciate it, which is
Yeah.
kind of the intent, right? It's for like Austen fans primarily.
I don't know. I actually haven't seen it. So maybe I'll add it to the rotation if it's not already there.
There's also a novel called Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters as well, which I think is more Cthulhu-esque, like
Nice.
mixed in with Sense and Sensibility. So you can read that
That's
if you want to.
amazing. All right. I have two final questions, and then I have a game for you guys.
Sweet.
The first, and I think I know pretty much everyone's answers, was the book better?
I will say that I think it's not as clear cut of an answer for me. Because I have to respect the writing style, I have to respect the time period in which it was written, and I have to respect the fact that when I read a book, I am the one creating the film in my brain. So what I create in my brain may not do it justice to the actual writing. Especially when I'm waiting for the excitement to kick on around page 300. But I think the film was great. I think it was a fantastic adaptation, and I think it conveyed what needed to be conveyed and condensed what needed to be condensed for me to be able to find it accessible and also believable. So for me, just personal opinion, I thought the film was better. I'm sorry, Jane Austen.
Rolls over once engraved.
But you had the idea, and that's what counts. So kudos.
Chris.
I find this so hard of a question to answer, which I suppose makes it a good choice for the category. I didn't have even my mind like made up when like coming to the podcast. I'm gonna say the film edges out the novel slightly for me. And it's not to say it's a bad book or you shouldn't read it. I think it's it is the warm body theory that we'll go back to, that May said like at the beginning of the podcast. I think that makes it in like a lot of that, I think, is the credit of the filmmakers and the actors and actresses, because some of the information is fairly scant sometimes on how characters are feeling. And I think it's quite the task to take that from the page and make it come alive like on the screen. So that's why I'm gonna go with the film as well.
I will have to vote the same way. I think that the novel's amazing, and it's two things. It's one, just a combination of the time difference between the novel and the film, and the way the film does make like the story much more appealing for modern audiences and much more understandable for modern audiences. And just with the fact that it's a much tighter story. Like, I love the layers of the novel, but if you want just a very tight cohesive romance with an interesting supporting cast, like the movie is the way to go. And the cinematography is just beautiful.
Yeah, costuming too, like
Yeah,
really great. I can't think of a single thing that's really missing from the book aside from the couple little nitpicky stuff of like, yeah, I would have liked to seen a little more Mr. Wickham having to eat some humble pie and whatever. But yeah, I would agree. I think it's just great.
and my last question is, would you give your blessing to Darcy and Elizabeth if you were Mr. Bennet?
Oh yeah.
Which version? The book or the film?
Either.
Actually, I like how it's presented in both in the book and the film. I mean, his answer is, this will answer give my answer to your question, which is that it would be the caveat of, are you really happy?
Mm-hmm.
If she's happy with him and that's what she wants, then yeah, absolutely. But as long as she knows what she's getting into and she understands her feelings, and it's not just for money, which I think was conveyed excellently in the book, and as Chris mentioned too, with Donald Sutherland's performance in the film, very heartfelt. Which is also saying something, because I think Donald Sutherland is one creepy dude. So like for him to actually be like relatable and likable in this film was also very impressive.
Right?
Because that guy plays smarmy real good. So anyway, but yeah, no, I'd give my blessing.
Ultimately, she's making the choice. So
yeah, I don't know. I would mostly give my blessing. I would have a lot more questions, and I'd also be like, you sure you don't want someone who's just nice, you know? Someone
Does
who's not
Mr.
gonna
Bingley
like
have any other friends?
someone who's not gonna just nag you, like.
I mean, it seems like she kind of likes it. Just don't do it to her sister. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's their kink, their power dynamic.
Who knows? Who knows? All right. Any final thoughts before our game?
For those who enjoy Pride and Prejudice, the novel, there are several spin-off books that have happened since then, that have been written by other authors over the years that take place in that universe. So until we ever have film adaptations of any of those and we get the the expanded universe of Pride and Prejudice, you can always check those out. There was a little snippet. I mentioned this because there's a little snippet at the end of the e-reader version that I got that was based on, I think it was like a story about Charlotte and what her life was like, being married to Mr. Collins after the fact, and taking place in that universe a few years after I think they'd been married. So yeah.
Is it a horror novel? Like
I know,
I
right?
imagine. Oh my god.
He mysteriously dies and she becomes a wealthy widow.
Yeah. So, but could be fun. I think my mom's actually, and a shout out to my mom again, that she's read a few of those and has mentioned that they were interesting. So figured I'd plug that here before we come to a close. But yeah.
All right. Well, the game is Pride and Prejudice themed. I will read you a quote, and I need you to tell me if it was something Darcy said in the movie or book, or if I just made it up for fun.
Noise.
Okay. Reading comprehension test. I like it now.
It's a game. All right. First one should be pretty easy. You guys ready?
Yep.
My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever.
Darcy.
Yes.
Correct. All right, they get harder as I go. Number 2. I have faults enough, but they are not, I hope, of understanding. My temper I dare not vouch for.
Darcy.
Okay.
It sounds close, but I feel like it wasn't. I'm gonna say no.
That actually was Darcy.
Oh. Oh well.
It's okay. All right. Chris has 2 points. Will has 1. Prompt number 3. Hardly, Miss Bennet. I should rather walk to Pemberley amidst a deluge of Mrs. Bennet's unceasing affections.
No.
Hmm?
I say no.
No. Okay.
Can you say it one more time?
Hardly, Miss Bennet. I should rather walk to Pemberley amidst a deluge of Mrs. Bennet's unceasing affections.
False.
Correct. I wrote that. All right. 3-2 currently. Number 4. My mind, once made, cannot be overturned. Certainly not by such weak arguments as these.
False.
Okay. Well,
Feels close to me, but yeah. You know what? I'm just gonna say true.
I also made that one up, but it is very close to
Close.
something he actually says.
Yeah.
About judging somebody's character, right? Like when somebody's fallen out of his graces or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. I think that's 4-2 now.
Yarp.
All right. One more. I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men.
I want to say true, but again, it's so close that it could be a variation on something else. But I'm just gonna say true.
I will say I didn't go into any of these and just like change a single word. Like if it was
No.
something I wrote, it is a like
Fully,
yes.
yeah, unique. Well, credit to you because it's good stuff. So yeah, I'm still gonna say true.
True.
I'm
Okay.
gonna say true as well. Sounds like a Wickham
This
section word.
this is Darcy at the first
No.
party.
No, but I'm saying like I think it's like, oh, I would speculate that's him talking to her when she's been maybe jilted or something. Not jilted, but anyway.
Yeah. But no, that was Darcy, so true.
Noise.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So I think that was 5-3. Chris winning there. So good job.
Good job, buddy.
Thank you.
You know exactly what Mr. Darcy sounds like.
I mean, yeah, I almost said yes to a couple of the fake ones, so you did a nice job with that. I
Thank
just was
you.
trying to like picture like when this would have happened, and it doesn't help that some of the dialogues tweaked from the movie to the novel as well. So it's like,
Yeah.
Well, hey, let's draw our next main quest, and we will skedaddle, get out of here.
Also, May, I want to give you a big thank you for selecting this as Was the Book Better? Because it's nice to have a little bit of more expanded knowledge of the classics, and great choice just generally. Like the 2 options were really good to review. So thank you.
Thank
Yeah, excellent choice. Anytime you're like having to struggle, it's a good sign.
you.
Our next card is going to be a versus mode. Been a while since
Ooh.
we had one of these.
Yeah.
So this will be a 2-parter. And this is a May pick.
Nice.
Ooh.
We will be watching Ex Machina and comparing it, contrasting it, and declaring a winner versus Gone Girl. So Ex Machina
Ooh.
and Gone Girl.
This
I
is
am
my good for her head to head.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm excited because I never seen Gone Girl. And managed to not have it spoiled either. I know there's like kind of a twist ending, and I have not seen Ex Machina since the first time I saw it, and I remember being a little lukewarm on it because of hype and all that stuff. So kind of knowing the film like I do now, I'm very curious to see how I'll come away from it the second time. Sometimes movies take like more than one viewing to click. So very pretty film, but I'm very excited.
I'm a little worried to rewatch Ex Machina. So I've seen both of these films before, but I also haven't seen Ex Machina since like it came out, and I like watched a clip from it recently, and I'm like, it's so weird to see Oscar Isaac in this role when I've seen him in like all this Star Wars stuff now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he's a versatile dude. Like I forgot he was in Drive. Like, you know,
Mm.
he plays like the characters like the recently out of prison like guy that comes back and talk about an awesome dance scene. Like we can more on that later, but for Ex Machina, it's one of my
Uh-oh.
favorite
Right?
out of place ones. But cool. So which one shall we watch first? I will give you the option since we are gonna make this a two-parter. Do you have preference?
I think Ex Machina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lock it in. Ex Machina will be our next episode. And then, of course, we'll follow that up with Gone Girl, and we will make a final declaration on that second episode on who we think the winner is. Until next time, please like, share, and subscribe. You can find a link in the episode description to nominate your own film, and you can choose a category, of course, in which to do that, and even indicate if you would like to be a host on ScreenQuest. We'd love to have you and would love to add more cards to our pile. You can find us on social media at ScreenQuest Pod on Twitter. Until next week, we love you. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.